And this month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by Super Inframan, Allison Cook, Eric Hervin, and Tim. Thank you so much for your incredible support.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And this is the 8th anniversary show for Where Did the Road Go? I started this show back in January 26, 2013, and until probably the week of the show, I didn't even know what I was going to do. And at the last minute heard, what's his name, on Coast to Coast, actually. And I'm completely blank. Jim Elvich, on his book, The Universe Solved, realized he was a Cornell graduate and was talking about simulation theory and went, that's a perfect first show. And so he was my first guest. But over the years, I've had many regular co-hosts, and two of them are here tonight. That would be Mr. Joshua Cutchin.
Hello.
And Mr. Timothy Renner.
Hello. Great to be back.
So on the 8th anniversary, I get promoted to co-host? I thought I was just a recurring guest. I'll take
you're co-host sometimes you're guest, depending.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I can't. Well, first of all, congratulations. But second of all, I can't overemphasize what a formative feature of a lot of my paranormal coming of age. Where Did the Road Go has been.
Good.
It's been absolutely integral to just a lot of my views and a lot of the way that I think about things, and I'm very honored to be a part of it with you.
Likewise. You know, when I wrote my first book, I had this kind of list that I wanted to go on Sasquatch Chronicles, I wanted to go on Where Did the Road Go, and I wanted to go on, you know, if the stars aligned and it was all possible, I wanted to go on Coast to Coast. And within the first month, I did all three of those things, and then I was kind of like, what do I do now? But that's how much I liked Where Did the Road Go. So people know how much I like Sasquatch Chronicles, so to put you right up there with them, that's it. Whether you know it or not, that's high praise.
Well, thank you. And I remember hearing Josh on Micah's show, and before you had the first book done, and I'm just like, I got to pay attention to this guy. This guy's doing interesting stuff.
Yeah, as I recall, I wrote you about appearing on the show, and you're like, "Oh yeah, I was going to get around to you anyway."
Yes, so, yeah. You were a definite. I want him on my show. He's really interesting. He's doing interesting stuff. And then you wrote me when the book came out, and I'm like, "Yes, please."
Yep.
And I remember getting Tim's book and not being sure. Like I'm looking at it, going, "This isn't just going to be urban legends, is it?" And I start flipping through it. I was actually at my dentist's office, and I start reading it, and I'm going, "Ooh." Nope. I like where this guy's going. All right. Who is this guy again?
Yeah, you know what? Now that I think of it, I might not have appeared on Where Did the Road Go in the first month. It might have been a little while, but I think I sent you the book in the first month. That I did those other things. Yeah. Time is like a fog for me at this point.
Yes, no kidding. So, but yeah, I mean, it was partially, Micah was probably my first regular guest. And then he kind of fell away from the paranormal stuff a little bit. Him and Paul Kimball were on regularly. But the first time I tried a round table was with Josh.
Yeah, it was me and you. Wait a minute.
It was me, you, Mike, and what was that girl's name? Summer.
That's right. Okay, that's what I was trying to remember. Yeah.
And then Summer didn't quite work out. We brought Red Pill in. And then over the years, we've just kind of expanded the roundtables. And they seem to be a fan favorite of the show, of the roundtable shows. So that's good. As much as I like talking to authors, I love talking to all of you guys.
I'm only going to come on octagonal table shows from now on. So
okay,
you
fine.
need a new table.
I'll get a saw, all right?
The dad jokes are strong with you.
Yeah, I can't help it.
And you guys have a book out called Where the Footprints End To.
The second and final installment
until part
Where the
3.
Prince in.
I
No.
just wonder at what point Josh can unchain me from the basement now that we're done volume 2.
Right.
I feel like you could be like Hitchhiker's Guide, and you could be like, this is the 2 book. This is the 3rd of the 2 books of Where the Footprints At.
Well, I was talking with Adam Sane about it, and I'm like, I really don't know. Besides just adding more cases, which you could probably do ad infinitum, I'm not sure what we should have gone into that we didn't.
No, you definitely covered a lot in these 2 volumes.
There's some theories that we didn't dive into. So we didn't dive into like the Nephilim's idea, and we didn't take a deep dive into some of the more elaborate, like, space Bigfoot mythologies. But besides that, we tried to be as exhaustive as we could.
Yeah, unless something comes up like completely unexpected. Like the woman in white thing was, it was kind of unexpected because like I made the connection and it ended up being something that was there, extant in folklore and in, a number of cases. But unless there's something like that we missed that comes up at a later date, that just something out of the blue like that, I can see doing an addendum chapter or something. But for the most part, I think we checked every box we wanted to check.
What if Bigfoot abducts you onto his UFO and then explains everything to you?
That's a whole other book, then.
I'm never coming back if that happens. I'll just, swing by Georgia and pick up the fam, and then be off to hang out with Zorth.
How do you know his name?
Because I was told by Timothy, who was told by somebody.
Yeah, I found Zorth's name. Zorth appears in the book.
Oh, that's right. All right, so let's start with Eyeshine, since that's in the very beginning. You make the difference between Eyeshine from reflectivity and something that actually creates its own light.
Yeah. So if you're driving down the road and you see a deer and the eyes light up in your headlights, that is Eyeshine, and that happens due to something called a tapetum lucidum. It's a reflective layer in the eyes that help nocturnal animals gather all the possible light they can. And it makes it for a very reflective eye. So when your headlights hit it, it shines back. And when I got into Bigfoot, that's all I heard about. Like, not all I heard about, but that's a lot of what I heard about when it comes to Eyeshine. I heard about tapetum lucidum and Eyeshine and reflections. And boy, did it make a lot of sense until you start digging into it. And the problem with that is, if Bigfoot is some sort of relict hominid or a great ape of some sort, or even just say it's some sort of higher order primate, it would be unique among the hominids, among the higher order primates, among the great apes, to have a tapetum lucidum. Because some low order monkeys, like I believe like lemurs and some monkeys like that, have tapetum lucidum, but no high order primates have them. Certainly no great apes, and no hominids have them. So when you're talking about a reflective layer on Bigfoot's eyes, that would be a very, very unique evolutionary thing for him. One of many, many, many incredible evolutionary traits that, according to Flesh and Blood people, Bigfoot has. He's the king of all evolution. So that is Eyeshine. And the other problem with that is many, many witnesses, a great number of witnesses, report that there was no reflective light, that it was totally dark, and there was nothing to reflect off their eyes, and they report them as being self-illuminating, glowing eyes, and that's what I term eyeglow.
Right.
And that's an even bigger problem, because there's no animal on Earth, mammal or otherwise, that has glowing eyes.
Except Bigfoot.
Except Bigfoot, if it's an animal. But, I mean, what does have glowing eyes are many, many folkloric creatures.
Yeah.
Your different fairies and brownies and goblins and ghouls and vampires and werewolves and on down the list. Many, many notes of glowing eyes amongst these sort of paranormal entities from folklore.
And in modern day as well. I mean, Keelhead has this whole list of red-eyed monsters.
Yeah. Yeah, and in fact, Keel basically listed glowing eyes as a trait that kind of points something out as paranormal and unnatural.
You know what I always think of, Tim, are those wonderful depictions of Smaug. I know at least in the animated Rankin Bass Hobbit, but he's got those headlight eyeballs that shine on things. Yeah, that's what I always think of.
So when I talked about this on the show before, where I suspect, that maybe part of the reason we have trouble photographing this stuff is that it may actually be bathed in infrared light. Which Keel suggests that they come from the infrared spectrum, that they move into our reality from that spectrum. And Natalie, who's been on, both of our shows, Tim, she had suggested that perhaps what we're seeing with the eyes equates to like infrared beams. And because I want to say she saw something like that, and that's what it reminded her of, were the infrared beams on like a camera or something.
Right.
Because they don't actually shine light out. They're just glowing red.
Yeah, I mean, except for there's a couple, very rare reports of Bigfoot with like eye beams, but those are by far in the minority. It's certainly possible. I mean, the problem is nobody knows what it is, and those people who claim that they know, they don't have the evidence to back it up.
Yeah, well, sure.
As Josh would say, show your receipts on that, because.
Well, I'm throwing it out there as a possible idea of what we might be seeing.
Yeah, no, speculation is fine. I'm talking about the flesh and blood types who 100% will declare it's, it's Eyeshine, and they have a tapetum, and that's the end of the story. As if they know, as if they have a Bigfoot body in the garage that they've dissected,
They do. They just don't want to tell you.
Oh, okay.
You're just not allowed to see it. No pictures.
Well, that's the end of this interview. Our book's no good. See you guys later.
In the garbage.
You also talk about the, well, you know what? Even if there is a flesh and blood Bigfoot, that doesn't explain all the weird accounts.
Exactly. And that's kind of what I've been saying, because we've sort of half-jokingly said, like, hey, you can prove us wrong by rolling a body into a lab any day, which I don't think is going to happen.
No.
But if we play around with that idea, that's just the beginning of it. If somebody does roll a body, and now you have a body of an ape-like thing, but now you have to explain why all this weirdness happens around it.
Exactly. And what are the weird things? You talk about them being bulletproof, and there's even one one of the accounts you share that said someone shot it, and like the bullet hole then started emitting light.
Yeah, I think that's in the weird lights section.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think it was a blue glow after somebody shot it. What a bizarre thing. Like, it's so weird.
And it goes down to, what if these things are made of light, essentially?
It's something I think you have to keep in the possibility bag,
Yeah.
Because of the way they act and move and don't seem to have a real physical presence sometimes.
And you have,
or sometimes they do.
You have a lot of accounts of anomalous lights, of course, being seen with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm leaning towards that. I mean, maybe that sort of Andrew Collins model of intelligent plasma, but also, this idea that you see, Tim has said that the Bigfoot form might be the most sophisticated form of this phenomenon, the most sophisticated, manifestation of whatever this phenomena is that causes raps and thrown stones and voices and footprints. And I would suggest that maybe, this ball of light or these anomalous lights are like the simplest version of that, like when a texture is missing on a video game or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Talk a little. There's a particular case you talk about with a green flash. Talk about that a little bit, because that was really interesting to me.
Yeah, I think it was Greg Newkirk from Hellier. I think his account was the first one I read about that. Now, it's not the first one that happened. I mean, there was some that happened before that we found, but I think his was the first where I read about it, and he pointed it out. This green flash that would happen, around in these, Bigfoot hotspots. It happened to him one night. He was at this particularly weird Bigfoot location, and right before the activity got really intense, and stones started being thrown, and they got bluff charged by something, and screams and all this stuff. they saw a bright green flash in the sky. And when I started digging around, they saw green flashes at the Sierra camp where they recorded the famous Seriah sounds, which is in the 1970s. There was a group of hunters, and then eventually Ron Moorhead and Al Berry were at this camp, and they heard and recorded what they presume to be Bigfoot speech. It's some kind of unknown speech. They presume it came from Bigfoot. They saw, had sightings of Bigfoot creatures. They had several footprints and all this stuff. But a lot of weird stuff happened there too, including, they saw this green flash, I believe, more than once. So, Greg had done some research and he had connected this green flash to other paranormal events. So it's not something I've ever seen, but a lot of people report it. They report this green flash before, ghost encounters, before Bigfoot encounters. I believe it's associated with UFOs as well.
And whoever wrote that chapter mentioned the fact that a lot of researchers will just leave that out because it doesn't fit with all the other stuff, so they just don't mention the green flash.
Sure. I mean, that's a problem with a lot of these things we talk about. A lot of this stuff gets left out or weird washed, as I like to say. It's not convenient. One of my favorites is the Fluorescent Freddy creature, which if you read a lot of the cryptozoological articles and books and so forth that mention Fluorescent Freddy, they'll talk about Fluorescent Freddy's glowing eyes. Say, there was this hair-covered creature, and I think it was Indiana, and they were calling him Fluorescent Freddy because of his glowing eyes. Well, no, it did have glowing eyes, but they were calling him Fluorescent Freddy because he was bright green. It's a very weird thing, a bright green hairy creature, but that's what they were. And if you go back to the old articles where they first reported him, that's why they're calling him Fluorescent Freddy.
And it just kind of got modified down, huh?
The green gets left out. The glowing eyes stay, but the green gets left out.
Huh. And I'm sure some of that is not intentional.
I get. It's hard to tell. From my end, it's really hard to tell anymore.
Yeah, I mean, because I'm sure there are some people who look at that and go, "Well, that doesn't belong," but there are other people who just glosses right. They just gloss right over it because that's not what they're looking for.
Maybe, maybe they're so intent on presenting this as a natural creature that it's lost on them.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, I've seen white flashes before, which are very odd, and I know other people have too, but I've never seen a green flash.
Yeah, I know. One of our Site 7 shows, I talked about seeing a flash, and we saw a flash of movement, James and I. And I guess we were unclear in the way we discussed it, and people thought we were talking about seeing a flash, and I got a bunch of people emailing and saying, I've seen a flash too, and they were talking about these flashes of light, but I believe most of them were white, like a camera flash.
Yeah, that's exactly what it looks like. What were you going to say, Josh?
I was just going to say I saw a blue flash at Waverly Hills when I was there, just sort of from around the corner, but it had that sort of television blue sort of quality.
And I notice when you see lights, a lot of times they're very primary colors.
That's an interesting point. I'm trying to think. So the Site 7 lights will kind of will morph a little bit. They'll change. Like sometimes you can see them change from red to blue or green or something. But for the most part, when they light up, they're one of these primary colors. I would say, yeah.
Yeah.
But green isn't primary.
True, but but green is it's not. It's a very natural color, I guess.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Because you see, when I saw lights on the ground one day, they were projected from the sky and there was nothing above me, they were white, red, and green or something like that. They were all very basic colors, I guess.
Like the basic crayon box.
Yeah. You never see something that's mauve, Mm. Oh, that's a light tan light. No, it's.
I'm gonna keep pushing back because there are a lot of UFO witnesses who say that the light looks uncannily unlike anything else they've ever seen in terms of its quality. So
definitely. But I'm talking about other when they do have colors.
Okay. The prosecution rests.
We're not talking about the color out of space here.
Okay.
And that's another thing. When I say it's coming in from the infrared, maybe that's part of why we're, maybe it's being bathed in a type of light that we just don't normally intersect with. And that's why it gives it that unnatural light like they've never seen before.
Well, so somebody who knows more about cameras will have to see if this applies. And I've been talking about this lately because people ask me, have you ever photographed these lights at Site 7? And yes, we have. And they're completely uninspiring photographs. They look like just, darkness with little points of light.
Right.
You're not going to convince anybody of anything. But I will say, the one weird thing is that if I'm looking at them and they're red and I take a picture on my cell phone, that picture 100% of the time, they will be white. If they're green and I take a picture, they'll be white. No matter what color they appear to my eyes, they will show up on the photograph as white.
That might be because you're taking the picture at night.
Okay.
And so what's happening is the light, even though it's not a super bright light, is still washing out to some degree in order to be captured. I'm not 100% sure about that, but that would be my suspicion.
Right, yeah.
I mean, because if you take a picture of any colored light, unless you use a longer exposure, and if you use a longer exposure, it can wash out too. But I think it's just the way the camera is dealing with a small light in the dark.
That would make sense.
Right. Yeah, that feels right.
Yeah.
So, if I'm wrong about that, someone please correct me, because I'm not an expert on that stuff, but I've used enough cameras to know that cameras do weird things with lights.
Oh, no worries, Seriah. It's the internet. Someone will correct you. It's okay.
Well, I'm just saying. I'm not saying that definitively. That's from my experience. I think that's probably what's happening. But it might also be that the light really is white, and you're seeing something else attuned to it.
Right. Well, make sure to set up your Gmail with your filtering with a well actually folder. You talk extensively about Bigfoot and UFOs, and you did in the first book as well. And how do you? We just talked about this a little bit, but how do you think these researchers intellectually explain away this data so easily?
Well, we have as a matter of historical record, we have some of it. We have John Green, who to his credit did actually write the intro to the Ann Slate and Al Berry book Bigfoot, which has a lot of stuff that we pulled from there for this. But he actually said, for example, regarding the UFO question, he said, if they, being Bigfoot, have been seen near UFOs, I would prefer to consider it a coincidence or to assume that the occupants of the UFO were just looking at the Sasquatch or vice versa. So, at the risk of sounding especially snarky, I think there's no small portion of them that are intellectually uncurious. But I also think that there are a lot of them that just aren't as well read in consciousness studies and folklore and whatnot as they should be.
Sure.
And that's my take.
When I got into this, first got into Bigfoot seriously, I listened to a lot of people that have been doing this for a lot longer than me, and the drum beat that I heard from them was that it rarely ever happens.
Yeah.
So I think part of the problem is this. I like to use the guitar shop metaphor. When I worked in a little guitar shop with my friends, I worked in there, and he told me selling a guitar that's not a Fender to someone whose older cousin had a Fender is the hardest thing you will ever do. Because that's who introduced them to guitars, and they looked up to their older cousin, and their older cousin was cool, and their older cousin told them Fenders are the best guitar. And that's the first thing they learned about guitars. And they took that to heart, and that became the thing for them. And he was right. Honestly, the owner of the store was entirely right. The hardest thing you'll do is to sell a guitar that's not a Fender to that person. But I think it applies in Bigfoot. So you get into Bigfoot, and there's these people that have these reputations, and they've been doing it forever, and they're telling you, well, this hardly ever happens. And I think a lot of people don't ever look beyond that because, big name in Bigfoot number 2 or 3 or 5 or whatever told them that it rarely ever happens, so that must be the case. So I don't necessarily blame those people that aren't looking further. I blame the people that told them that it rarely ever happens because I find that intellectually dishonest. It does happen. It happens a lot. The reason why I put an insane number of cases in there was to sort of demonstrate, like, this is not a rarity. This happens, and this happens a lot.
Well, not only that, but you have two rare phenomena that just happen to show up at the same time.
Right. That's the major point. How rare is it to see UFO? How rare to see Bigfoot? And now people are seeing them either together or, within an hour of each other or relatively, same time, same place.
Well, and I think there's also, in addition to this, there's also sort of an early church sort of mentality where you're like, the controversial gospels, let's burn those or hide them away or bury them. So I think that there's such a desire to be accepted by the scientific mainstream that even if there are these odd outliers, the evidence in support of it being a primate, if you just look at that, is really, really freaking good. And this other stuff sort of spoils the batch, so to speak. So I think that there's a real suppression, a deliberate suppression of information as well.
And there's definitely, I mean, with all these fields, there's this need to be accepted by mainstream science. And I don't see that happening as long as mainstream science has this materialistic view of the world. I mean, we have psi studies that are, completely unquestionable in their veracity and their data, and they're still not accepted. So, what are the chances that Bigfoot, ghosts, or any of this stuff will be unless we had, a Bigfoot body?
Well, but I mean, that sort of goes back to something that I talked about in my essay for, UFOs Reframing the Debate, is that it's time for a lot of these disciplines to pivot to embracing some of these weird outliers, because there's a lot of good science, a lot of laboratory verified scientific experiments involving the reality of psi phenomena, and that's going to open a lot more possibilities. So Bigfoot community, whatever that is, aren't doing ourselves any favors by trying to play at a game that we're already handicapped in participating in.
Yeah. And the thing is, of course, you also have all these different disciplines that, the UFO people think the Bigfoot people are nuts and vice versa. And they also, they all think the UFO people are nuts and the ghost people are nuts. It's like, again, it comes down to like this tribalism of, our thing is legitimate, but these other people, they're nuts.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you find all that stuff mixed together and it's like, oh, we'll just ignore that because that's nuts.
Exactly. Yeah.
We could trust the witness on the Bigfoot part, but when he says he saw a UFO, well,
Yeah, yeah. Well, I want to hear all about his Bigfoot sighting, but as soon as he talks about his house being haunted, that guy's crazy.
Well, yeah. Perfect example. I was on another show, and I had mentioned a Bigfoot disappearing, by which the witness meant I was staring at it, and it blinked out of existence. And the host was like, well, maybe it just went behind a tree or it just went into a ditch. And I said, no, it's our duty to believe these people. If we're going to believe part of their story, we should believe the whole story, because if you take that logic and you keep on walking it back, you wind up with, you saw a bear. That's what you wind up with.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, maybe it jumped into the ditch. Well, maybe it wasn't as tall as you thought it was. Well, maybe you only partially saw it on 2 feet. Well, maybe it was just big and hairy because it was a bear.
Yep. We either believe our witnesses or we don't.
Right.
I mean, that's what it comes down to with this stuff. And the thorny truth of that is that mainstream science hates witness testimony.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there's reasons for that, but with this stuff, that's the bread and butter. It's not something you can just call into existence. If it was, we'd already have the answers.
Yeah, all we have is witness testimony, really. I mean, and some casts.
At the risk of this turning into a wandering the road, I mean, that gets back to a bigger philosophical question of the fact that, like, we don't value witness testimony, but at the same time, everything is filtered through our 5 senses,
right,
including our replicable scientific results. So you could say that everything's tainted.
That is true. All right, let's move on to mimicry, because I always find mimicry really interesting. And these things can seem to be able to create all kinds of noises.
Yeah. Yes. Josh has made an apt comparison to the lyrebird?
The lyrebird. Yeah. If anybody hasn't seen the lyrebird, go to YouTube and look at the lyrebird, because it's absolutely uncanny. It's fun to watch, because lyrebirds in captivity will mimic chainsaws and the camera shutters, like, with a ridiculous degree of accuracy. wild. I don't believe that as of the writing, anyone had actually documented them doing that, which further complicates the whole Bigfoot scenario. But the things that Bigfoot can apparently mimic are, I would venture to say, literally unending. It's just anything, car doors, forklifts, train whistles, human voices, any number of animal sounds. A special affinity that they seem to have for bird sounds, and a special affinity within that for owl sounds. And most of them are described as being dead on, except it's just a little bit off. So it's almost like the uncanny valley of the ear, I guess.
Huh. Yeah, there seems to be, you listed a bunch of connections between owls and Bigfoot here.
Yeah, it's interesting because as whenever I write a book, I'm always very pleased to find these little garden paths that I never thought I'd be traveling down. And one of them that I found to be really interesting was the concept of contact calls. And everybody, even though if you don't know what it is, you're familiar with the concept where like somebody's on a stealth mission at night and they make it sound like a bird so that somebody on their team will know what they're doing, that old trope. But the most commonly used contact call, I found out, according to this one late 19th century Austrian scientist, criminologist who decided to study them, is actually owls, because a lot of these things happen at night. So there's some idea that might be the case there. But, the owl, as anybody who has read Mike Clelland's work can attest to, it's just absolutely dripping with symbolism. You've got death omen symbolism. You've got, shamanic symbolism. You've got some, vampire and witch symbolism there as well. So it's really interesting. You'll have this correlation between owls and Bigfoot, because people claim that they hear something that sounds like an 800-pound owl making noises,
Yeah. Wait, there are not 800-pound owls?
No. But I was sort of questioning myself, because like on the face of it, that doesn't sound like really like high strangeness. It just sounds like the ape is really good at mimicry, but it does sort of lapse into that high strangeness category when you start to pick apart like how animals mimic. We start to pick apart the fact that apes are not especially adept vocal mimics, and they certainly don't have much of a capacity for speech. There's a very unconvincing video. It's creepy, but it's not great, of an orangutan that is able to mimic a couple of words.
Right.
But some of the stuff from Bigfoot sounds like, some of these stories are just, it sounds like someone saying, "Hey, what time is it?" And people turn around and they'll see a Bigfoot standing there.
Right.
Just really creepy stuff. But there is, I thought, an interesting occult connection, because, as I alluded to earlier, Bigfoot really seemed to be absolutely enamored with bird sounds. Like, far and away, that's what they like to make the sounds of. And there is a very storied occult concept of the language of birds, which it goes back through, at least the Abrahamic religions. And there was an idea that the language of birds was something that could be harnessed and would reveal occult secrets if you could master it. So I, found that interesting. A lot of the ways that people have proposed that Bigfoot are able to make some of these sounds, or if they have multiple sets of vocal cords. The only mammal that we know that has that is the koala bear. So not a particularly convincing explanation, but yeah. So if you start to look at the primatology behind it, you're like, oh, this actually is a really strange feature that this creature shouldn't have. And it starts to make a little bit more sense once you frame it within the context of, suites of different phenomena like poltergeist or consciousness phenomena as well.
Right, yeah. Because obviously mimicry is a favorite of poltergeists.
Yes, absolutely.
You want to talk a little bit about Susan Mcleod's? I don't know how to say her name. Experience?
Ouch. I'll try. Yeah, so she was a witness that Mike Cleland had talked to, and she was a spiritually inclined person from Ontario, and she had experienced a lot of owl synchronicities one summer. This was, I believe, back in 2015, and one of the most dramatic things that happened was a bedroom visitation in mid-August. And that next morning, she was very hesitant to go into a dental procedure, which, for whatever reason, she had to undergo without anesthesia. But she was actually able to slip into a trance state where she said that she saw this bunch of Native American imagery. I believe she had some Native American heritage. A vision of this beautiful green room with a big golden retriever inside. Once the procedure was over, the hygienist sort of remarked, I can't believe that you were able to do that without having to go under. And she explained what happened in the vision that she had, and apparently this vision corresponded to the hygienist's bedroom and dog. And that evening, she actually had a teepee set up as, I guess, sort of a little retreat on her property. And she was doing some reflecting on a friend who had passed away. And allegedly, while drumming and singing, she had heard something like brush up against the side of the teepee and smelled a foul smell. Walks outside, and there are these, family of 5 Bigfoot. So she, walks, but goes back inside, but eventually decides to return home. And when she gets home, she finds out that her entire family has been dealing with, these shadow figures that have been sort of quote unquote flying through the house. And she was upset by this, but she didn't want to really, from what I understand, she didn't want to trump their experience with oh, what? Yeah, well, I saw Bigfoot. So she just, apparently everything had started to die down, but she went outside and she looks up in the air and she sees this large black triangle that passes overhead. So she really hit the jackpot of paranormal experiences on one night. It would seem, all kicked off by an owl.
Huh. All right. We talked about voice imitation. So let's talk a little about the samurai sounds. And you've both heard the EVP I got back over the summer, and Tim said it kind of sounded like samurai sounds, and I wasn't familiar with that at all. But it seems like it's just mumbling.
Say it again. I'm sorry, you broke up.
The samurai sounds. What? How are those described?
As samurai sounds. So they're colloquially sort of known as samurai sounds, samurai vocalizations. They were first sort of popularized or made famous by the Seriah sounds recorded by Ron Moorhead. If anyone hasn't heard them, go out of your way to look for them. You can find them online. They are rather chilling. They're pretty strange. But people have compared the dialect to some sort of Asian language, more specifically probably something like Japanese with a really guttural inflection that you would associate with a lot of old Kurosawa films.
Just do it, Josh. Just do the imitation.
Oh, come on. That sort of thing. So.
Yeah, I guess.
So now we need to have a conversation with Bigfoot, Terrence McKenna, and Alex Jones, all three together in one room. Now they can do all this.
We'll just sit back.
Yeah. But this descriptor comes up time and again, and even when people don't say, "Oh, it sounds like a guttural Japanese language," they'll be like, "Well, it sounds like somebody speaking backwards, or somebody drunk speaking backwards, or all sorts of things." So the descriptions of these voices are pretty consistent. In volume 1 of Where the Footprints End, I did note that in Colin Wilson's book Poltergeist, he mentions that a lot of these early poltergeist manifestations, the voices will have sort of an animalistic, guttural, grunting quality that's not entirely clear. So that's sort of another connection between the two. But the language has been analyzed, the Seriah tapes specifically, by a former Navy cryptolinguist by the name of, I should know this guy's name off the top of my head, and I don't, Scott Nelson. Scott Nelson, who said that it was very clear that there was actually a language there. It wasn't just nonsense. There was, there are certain ways that specialists can see that there's a consistency of, morphemes and phonemes and whatnot and syntax, and they can say, oh, I don't know what this is, but there does seem to be some sort of language there. But it doesn't really map onto anything. People will, sort of have this audio version of pareidolia and say, oh, I heard this or that, the other, and associated with a language, but there doesn't seem to be a real strong connection there. However, our good friend Ren Collier said to me one time, he goes, hey, Josh, have you ever noticed how those Seriah sounds kind of sound like barbarous words or barbarous speech? And I'm like, and for anybody who doesn't know, these are the sort of made up, I won't quite say glossolalia, but these sort of made up languages that are either transliterated Hebrew or sometimes just completely made up to sound real languages that you find in some magical practices. And it's all about sort of the intent of the words that comes out to sound, ancient and strange and basically weird. And he's got a good point, having listened to some examples, there really does seem to be an example. So it's another little sort of magical connection between Bigfoot and the occult.
Huh. All right. Let's move on to psychedelics. And Bigfoot is sometimes seen under psychedelic trips as well as UFOs and all kinds of different stuff. But my question... Well, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, just to be clear, as far as the entities that are reported under a lot of trips, I mean, yes, you do have a couple of examples here and there, and you do, often find people... seeing some sort of 2001 A Space Odyssey version of, humanity rising up from some sort of primordial ape ancestor, but it's not nearly as common a trope amongst people who have taken things like DMT as, insect entities or reptilian entities or, greys or the self-transforming machine elves. So I want to make sure that that's really clear.
But I guess my question is, are what people are seeing, how much of those guided by cultural memes versus some kind of external actual existence?
Well, I kind of wonder if actually, no, I'm not going to share that because that's a great idea that I just had. I'm going to write it down. But I think that there's something really universal about the image of Bigfoot. There's been so much philosophizing on man's role as the smartest of the animals, and how much are we between animal and human. So I think that even without some of those cultural stimuli, you might end up seeing something like that anyway. But if you ask that question, you might as well ask the same question of people who see all sorts of things under altered states of consciousness. The gray alien meme everybody sees everywhere. So
true. All right. And how does infrasound play into the whole psychedelic conversation?
Right. So couple of examples here and there where Bigfoot is seen under the influence of psychedelics, but altered states need not be achieved by substances. They can be achieved by other means. And we all are very adept at doing it when we go to sleep. We slip into an altered state of consciousness, but some cultures have used sound to do so. And some people claim that things like, those binaural beats that you can find are actually accomplishing the same thing. Never worked for me, but I can understand that.
They've worked for me.
They have.
Yes.
Everything works for you, Seriah. Jeez.
No, that's not true at all.
Stop hogging all the paranormal juju. But it's interesting. One of the means that certain indigenous Australian groups are able to claim to have been able to sort of access the dream time is by using drones, and using specifically drones produced on the didgeridoo, which you buzz your lips to produce a fundamental pitch, and then you vocalize. Actually, I have a didgeridoo right here at hand, so how about we So yeah, like that.
Yep.
This is your show and tell portion of the show.
Tim,
Anyway.
Tim, where's your didgeridoo?
Oh, I have a Bigfoot right here at hand, so I was just going to bring that out later.
Okay, cool.
Anyway, so and there's a strong tradition of drones being used to create altered states of consciousness. And there is a witness that I found who described his son being basically hit with something that a lot of Bigfoot researchers would say is something like infrasound, but he described it as sounding exactly like a didgeridoo. His son was basically having a seizure on the ground, and they had to rescue him, and there was this Bigfoot in the tree line that was making this noise. What's interesting about that is that same basic concept of producing a fundamental pitch and another pitch above it is also very similar to tube and throat singing, or overtone singing is more generally known. And there are examples of this sound coming through as well in certain Bigfoot encounters. There's a great example that Al Berry talks about in the Bigfoot book about hearing this singing, this really unsettling singing that comes from the mountain while they're looking for Bigfoot. And he said it was droning and it came out of the gut, and he said it sounded like a chant that he had heard from a Japanese monastery. Well, the Ainu of Japan, up until a certain point, where I actually did practice overtone singing in their monasteries in Japan. The last practitioner of that died in 1976. So it's entirely possible that this is what Barry was referring to. So that's another connection. And then Timothy, of course, in an episode of Strange Familiars, recorded something that sounds very much like this sort of overtone singing.
Yes, I did. I didn't know that was my cue. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I can't remember all the circumstances around it, but you heard it more than you were actually able to isolate it, right?
I didn't hear it at all on the day. So I was interviewing a witness who was taking me around to. He had about 3 different Bigfoot encounters. One sighting in one very harrowing area where 2 different areas where. In one day where he had sort of encounters, and one he was screamed at, had very, very terrifying event. I guess he insisted was a howl, not a scream, I believe. But before he took me to those other places, he took me to a place that was probably not even a mile away as the crow flies, maybe even closer than that. It's an area called Pond Bank, and it was right on the edge of the Michaud Forest. It's so named for a pond. And this pond has a woman in white legend, which is, he had heard me talking about the woman in white thing and was sort of blown away because this is so close to where he had his encounters. And this woman in white spirit supposedly haunts this pond, and there's a chant. You can say, white lady, I have your baby, and she will come out supposedly on the other side of the pond. She supposedly drowned her kid. So it's a woman in white legend. But I was interviewing him there at Pond Bank, at the pond at Pond Bank, and noticed nothing the day. Now, it was very cold and windy. I remember that, and I couldn't wait to get back in his truck. I didn't pull my jacket out when I was talking with him, which was a mistake. So maybe I didn't hear it because I was eager to get back in the truck. But when I got home, I listened back to his interview, and during the whole interview, there's this very, very low, like Josh said, kind of almost like tube and throat singing drone throughout the thing. Sounds like a very low groan or growl, but it's pretty consistent drone throughout. And I asked the witness, I said, "Did you hear this?" And he said, "No, I didn't hear that." So we picked it up on the recording, did not hear it while we were there, but it's this very low kind of, I call it the Pond Bank groan, but it does have that tube and throat singing kind of characteristic to it, and it carries on. It's a long kind of drone. It's throughout the entire background of the interview. When I'm interviewing this witness, I caught like maybe a couple seconds of it isolated where we weren't talking, but the rest of it you can hear it throughout the interview.
So now we have this through. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say it's like that when we were recording down at Site 7, and there was that plane that you didn't hear, and I mean it was ridiculous for a plane because it went on for what, like 15 minutes?
Yeah, like it was like circling us overhead or something.
Well, but it started for like far away and got louder and louder. And
no, yeah. It
and
did have the Doppler effect. But,
yeah, and I was going, what is that? And you're like, I don't hear anything. But it showed up on the tape perfectly fine.
It did, yeah.
So we have this through line of this things being described in a similar way, and when you combine that with a number of Native American beliefs that Bigfoot possesses the ability to hypnotize you, the pattern starts to emerge, and it's further reinforced by the fact that there are people who hear this buzzing or humming sound right before they have a Bigfoot encounter. And that buzzing and humming sound, of course, is very common in I would pretty much say every sort of paranormal encounter. Not every single instance, but you can find examples of it in every single category. Very common in alien abductions. Quite common in psychedelic trips. Also, Marian apparitions and OBEs, NDEs, and of course now Bigfoot as well. So I kind of wonder if it's not sitting at a spectrum between the Oz factor on one end and this buzzing sound on the other end. If maybe one isn't ushering you into an altered state and one isn't, as you come out of an altered state. I don't know. Just playing with it. I don't know.
While you were talking about this, Josh, I formulated this idea for another book called "There's Nothing Weird About Footprints." And I'm going to write it under a pseudonym, like something like Jack Jones or Iowa Jones or something. And it's going to be a flesh and blood Bigfoot book. And I'm going to steal all of our chapter headings for both books. It's just going to be one thin book, though. And for each chapter, it's just going to have one word underneath. And it's going to be infrasound, because that explains all the weirdness.
You know what? It's so funny. That's one of the most prized phrases that you hear amongst flesh and blood researchers is, don't explain an unknown with another. And yet, in the same breath, a lot of them will trot out infrasound as an explanation for any of this high strangeness,
as if it's a known, as if it's a known, yeah,
as if it's a known fact that Bigfoot can and does produce infrasound. But some of the things that they attribute to infrasound are just they're not even proven in laboratory settings, so I don't really know what they're going for.
Well, they're going for what they think sounds like a scientific explanation, because we know infrasound exists.
Right.
Yeah, but yeah. So it's like the I effing love science version of research. Like, it sounds sciencey. I love it. It's awesome. I don't understand any of the underpinnings of it, but it sounds sciencey. We're gonna go with it.
All right. So, I was actually going to talk to you about the buzz, because the buzz is very common in a lot of stuff. Shape-shifting Bigfoot. Get into that a little bit.
Well, you had W.J. Sheehan on here, who had that great story about running into this greaser in an area where they should have seen a Bigfoot, and basically they were on ATVs and they came around, and where they thought they would see the Bigfoot that they had just witnessed crossing out of this copse of trees was this like immaculately dressed, basically 50s greaser guy who was smoking a cigarette that didn't smell and didn't make smoke, and then literally vanished. They turned away and they looked right back and he was gone. Which again, is that definitely Bigfoot? I don't know. But you couple that with, again, some indigenous belief that Bigfoot is a shapeshifter, and it seems like it's a possibility. It's interesting, that greaser bit finds a little bit of a loose parallel on a story that I found from Italy, of all places. In 1978, there was a family who was traveling between two different cities, and they were passing an abandoned house when this bright light descends from the sky, and it stops, and it lets out this naked Bigfoot with these sharp teeth and these big round eyes, and it bounds along the road beside them, and as it's going along, it turns into a human being with long brown hair and light colored pants and a dark jacket. So it kind of fits that 50s greaser stereotype too. So I don't know what Bigfoot has to do with greasers, but there you go.
Huh. But there's multiple cases of these things, like turning into trees, turning into deer.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. There was another example of somebody in 2014 who claimed that they saw Bigfoot, and as it was running away, it's almost like it sort of pushed into their brain the image of a deer, which kind of brings to mind the story that Mike Cullen collected about somebody seeing a gray alien walking through the forest, and they heard this voice in their head that said "owl, owl, owl, owl" until the gray turned into an owl. Very similar to that, but. Yeah, there are stories, and the tree stories. I mean, they kind of made it into that chapter, but they're also peppered throughout both books because it's very common that people say that these Bigfoot will sort of turn into trees, to the extent that like some people say that like you have seen a Bigfoot, but it just happened to look like a log or a dead tree stump. People who, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say there's that weird picture on the end of Tim's first book.
Yeah, there's that.
Because that looks like a tree stump, pretty much.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, and may have been. The only thing I say is I went back and it weren't there.
But I mean, apparently these things can hold up to really intense scrutiny, according to some people. Like there's one example where two hunters are being observed through binoculars, and they walk right by a Bigfoot that's sitting there as a stump. They like react and they freak out, and they continue walking on. And the person observing with the binocular sees the Bigfoot get up and walk away later. There are instances of the fellows from the North American Wood Ape Conservancy down in Texas seeing these logs, like a collection of logs in a clearing where they had thought they had seen a Bigfoot, and they tracked it to this clearing, and all they saw were a bunch of logs laying on the ground. They came back like the next day or whatever, and there are no logs in the clearing. So their conclusion was that the Bigfoot laid down and just looked like a log. And I can see, like in that sort of ghillie suit way, how a Bigfoot might look like tree bark from a distance, but some of these apparently claim that Bigfoot can hold up at very close scrutiny to being, a tree trunk or something, which I think says less to, some sort of natural mimicry explanation, and really does speak more to that shape-shifting concept and to the concept that these things are really closely tied to the trees. I mean, there are some ideas that the wood knocks are actually Bigfoot phasing in and out of trees, which I know kind of sounds silly, but there's actually one indigenous story, I believe it's a Ojibwe story, where there's an Indian brave who is sick and he needs sustenance, but he's almost ready to die of starvation and thirst, and this Bigfoot comes along and turns into a tree and gives him some of its sap. So there's this really close tree Bigfoot connection that honestly has me kind of wondering if we're not looking at something like a dryad from Western European folklore.
All right. Let's look at the. Let me try to form words properly. Let's look at the co-creation idea around Bigfoot.
Well, it is an underreported aspect of the paranormal in general that people don't always agree on what they see. And by that I mean, you might have 5 witnesses and 3 say that the UFO was red and 2 say that it was white, or 3 people will see the UFO and 2 won't, or any combination therein. And and this also seems to happen with some Bigfoot cases. Anybody who's not familiar with the co-creation angle, it's an idea that Greg Bishop is sort of refining, the idea that we bring sort of our cultural baggage to these experiences because what we look at either is so alien and foreign that we don't know don't know how to interpret it, and we just sort of put our own filter on it, our own mask on it, or the idea that whatever this other intelligence is sort of reaches into our brains and picks out an image that will sit with us pretty well. I brought up that sort of differing perception bit because of the story that Tim had on his podcast, where there was some witness discrepancy on the description of the Bigfoot, and I think it might be better if Tim actually tells that story rather than me.
It's my favorite Bigfoot encounter. It turned into my
good one.
Yeah,
it's a good one.
My favorite Bigfoot encounter. I think probably because we were working on the book when it came in. So this witness named Gage called in and he told his story. Grew up in somewhere in Washington, but he said Bigfoot was not a thing that was in his mind as a child. That he and his friends played in the woods every day, and they didn't discuss Bigfoot. He said they didn't even really know about Bigfoot. I think the time he was growing up kind of fell in that window between the like big 1970s pop culture Bigfoot thing and the sort of pop culture rebirth of Bigfoot later probably in the late 90s, early 2000s. And one day he was in the woods with two of his friends, and they said it was a very strange feeling in the woods that day, kind of ominous feeling, but they go into the woods, that's where they played. He described it as their woods. And they were walking down the path, and he saw a big white hairy creature in a tree it was kind of a tree that had fallen down, that it was standing on top of the kind of leaning trunk. This big white creature that hopped down out of the tree, and he said he got the feeling that it was warning them. It was telling them, like, don't go any further. Like he said, he didn't know whether there was like bad people back that path or a cougar or something, so he got, in general, a very positive feeling from this thing. Although it was scary, it scared him. He got the feeling that it was there to sort of warn them away, and overall it was not a harmful creature in any way, and generally was a positive thing. And what he saw was a big white hairy creature in the tree that came down, and they just called it the Beast. He and his friends, they never talked about Bigfoot, etc. And it was years later, as an adult, he started getting interested in Bigfoot. And of course, he thinks back to this and he goes, wow, I think we saw Bigfoot. And he gets back in touch with these two guys randomly. He sees one along the street one day, and I think he reconnected with the other on Facebook. And he talks to them both about it. And the one kid didn't see anything. He saw nothing. He said, I don't know, I guess I was looking down that day. And he said he didn't see anything, which is, to me, that's a very, very interesting thing. Was he looking down, or did he not see anything? And the other kid said, yeah, I remember that day. I remember the Beast, as we called him. He said, that thing was pure evil. And he said, well, what did it look like? And so this other kid says, well, he's an adult now. This other guy says, it was pure black. It was pure black, and it came down out of that tree, and it was nothing but evil, and he scared the heck out of me, and et cetera, et cetera. So here we have, three witnesses to this event. One says he saw nothing. One is insistent that it was a white creature that came down out of that tree, and the other is insistent that it was one of these blacker than black things, and one got a very positive feeling, and the other got a very negative feeling from it.
Huh.
I think that is important, regarding the co-creation idea, because if anybody finds the idea of shape-shifting unpalatable, like physically shape-shifting, if the co-creation idea is what is at play, or some sort of mechanism like that, it really makes a lot more sense for how these different things can sort of change their appearance on a dime, if it's all happening within the confines of our head.
Or if it's reaching in and like you said, sort of making a skin, out of whatever's in our head.
Right.
Yeah. In I believe it was Sixth Sense. Jenny Randles talks about the idea of a memory store that these things might be pulling in on.
Well, I mean, you could look the same way at like grays. Grays were not the most commonly reported UFO occupant until Communion and Missing Time came out. And then only in countries where Communion and Missing Time came out.
See, I don't know what to... Every time this comes up, I always... that Close Encounters was a lot earlier than Communion.
Yeah, but I don't think
it had a lot wider spread. I mean, I would have to imagine,
Yeah, but there was something especially about Communion that seemed to really click with people.
I mean, I'm just the gray image in general. I guess the gray on the front of Communion, the visitor on the front of Communion, is a little bit more stylized, and maybe that's why it resonated with people. But yeah.
But I mean, it's still, it says how much of ourselves are we putting into these things.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's a great question that needs to be asked.
So you talk a lot about in the book various parts about Les Stroud. And who is Les Stroud?
He's my hero.
Les, I believe, I believe has a copy of at least one. Yeah.
Yeah, Les's people reached out, and he does have a copy of Volume 1. We'll see if we can get him a copy of Volume 2. Les Stroud is Survivor Man. If anybody has seen his show on whatever channels it's on cable or whatever, he's sort of a survivalist guy who, due to a couple experiences of his own, I think he was grunted or growled at by something in the bush one time that he couldn't explain, and had a couple other sort of Class B incidents, became interested in the Bigfoot phenomenon, and started off his series Survivor Man Bigfoot. By the way, as far as like Bigfoot TV shows, I don't think it gets any better than that. I think it's a very honest show because he starts off looking for some kind of monkey in the woods, and by the end of, I watched it all in one run, so it might have been 2 seasons, but by the end of his search, he's convinced there's something far stranger going on, and it's not just some kind of monkey, which is, very honest for this guy who makes science documentaries. That's his job. And he ends up just being like, whoa, there's just too much weird stuff associated with this. So, very much someone I admire, and I appreciate his journey and his honesty rather, with his journey through the Bigfoot phenomena, because it mirrors my own in a way, but it's his journey, and he's documented almost every step of it on film.
Okay.
Excuse me. I also have to say that his experiences also factor into not only the first volume of Where the Footprints In, where he has sort of a sleep paralysis encounter with a UFO kind of thing happen, but also Volume 2. He's claimed to have gotten a couple of instances of mind speak, and there was one that was this voice that said, if you want to meet us, come over here and stay the night. We're over on the hill, but you have to stay the night. And he said, I'm not ready for this. And he actually, after that, the voice was so strong and felt so exteriorized to him that he actually went and did a full psych eval, and they said he was fine. He wasn't schizophrenic or didn't show any signs of any sort of mental illness. It was just he heard some voice from somewhere say that in his head.
And this guy's the real deal. He's not one of these survival guys that stays in a hotel and goes out and pulls a couple leaves and eats them on camera and then goes back and stays in the hotel. I believe he was in the Canadian Special Forces. He's kind of a serious dude.
Okay. And he had the thought too that the tree knocks were coming from inside the trees.
Well, he was told that by some First Nations people in California. I can't remember the tribe, but he went out and they were in this area known for Bigfoot, and they were looking for Bigfoot, and they decided to set up camp for the night. It was very wet and cold, and they kept hearing these knocking sounds from inside this big tree, I think it was a big cedar tree, and I believe that the native person that was with him said that the creatures are inside the tree. And he didn't believe it at first, but they kept hearing this knocking sound the entire time they were there. They couldn't get a fire going. He's actually, getting very, very worried and upset about him. Eventually, this tree cracked right beside them and fell down and exposed a bunch of dry wood that they could use to start their fire and thereby stay the night and not freeze to death. And I think he said after the tree cracked, the knocking stopped. It was from another tree. They never heard that knocking again from the tree that they were hearing. So he started to wonder, is there something to this? It's certainly bizarre that these sounds kept happening. He couldn't explain the knocks, and then they stopped when they were for all intents and purposes given this dry wood.
Again, feels very poltergeist-like.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. For me personally, it's hard to separate this stuff anymore. And, I've said recently that people will say to me, well, you know, it's all jinn. And I'll go, okay. And they say, well, somebody else will say, well, you know, it's all fairies. And I'll say, okay.
Well, it is, but
And
that's okay.
someone else will say, you know, it's all poltergeist. And I'll say, okay, because it's just a name you put on it. It doesn't,
Sure.
you know, at this point for me, it doesn't matter what you call it.
Well, I don't think the entire phenomena is necessarily poltergeist. It's just that things like that, though, could happen inside a house very easily and be attributed to a ghost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
talk about the upside down trees.
Very interesting. So
Yeah.
these are found, for the most part, in the western United States and Canada. I did find some instances in Pennsylvania. I've seen a couple of these myself. Usually they're an upside down tree, just driven, would appear to be driven into the ground, so that the roots are up and the top of the tree is driven into the ground. Now you got to be careful with these, because apparently this is a pastime that when there's loggers around and they have machines and they're bored. I've heard from loggers that they will often do this. They'll just drive trees into the ground upside down and leave them that way. But Les Stroud found some, and he looked and he said he could find like no signs of any machine digging or any, you know, kind of shovel signs or anything that looked like a man put it there. The ones I've seen, these aren't in logging areas. I saw one in an X formation, and it was actually along Toad Road. They do some logging there, but this particular thing, it wasn't in the area where they do logging. So neither was in an area where you could bring a machine. So people find these upside down trees. Now the problem with this and all of these stick structures is no one's seen Bigfoot do this, right? So this is one of those things that people just assume because they're found in the area where there's Bigfoot reports. People assume, oh, Bigfoot does this. We don't know, but it is very, very interesting to speculate, you know, why and what it could mean. And there's various ideas. A lot of people, you know, say they're warnings or this or that, but they tend to say that with all these stick structures. And my chapter where I talk about them is basically I meet speculation with speculation. It's a lot of speculation in that chapter, but everything on these stick signs is speculation at this point, because no one, to my knowledge, no one has seen any Bigfoot make any of these stick structures.
What, and when you say a tree is driven upside down, I mean, how is that even done? Because it would seem like the top parts of the tree would be very fragile.
Well, these are bigger trees, so you know, maybe the top, the most fragile part of the top is broken off or, you know, knocked off or somehow. But you know, the one I saw was a pretty substantial tree that was the top branches were, I'm guessing, broken off. And the top part of the tree was kind of driven in to make an X structure. And as I've said, you know, trees don't fall upside down. So this was either a group of people that did this, or you know, someone with, I don't know. I don't see how someone could get a machine into the place where I saw it. But yeah, so I'm guessing that the more fragile top parts are just broken off till it becomes like, you know, just a straight trunk essentially.
All right. We're almost out of time, so we're going to have to finish the last few things I want to talk to you about on a Patreon.
That'll do.
But tell people where they can find the book.
Where the Footprints End, Volume 1 and Volume 2 are both available on Amazon. They're both available to order through your bookseller. They might have to do some book fill, but I believe they're available through the regular kind of book distribution channels. You can get them from Josh. You can get them from me. You can find all of my other books on Amazon as well, except for Apparitions, Illustrations of the Other, which is my art book. That is not yet on Amazon. I'm working on it, but it's not there yet. You can get that directly from me, and you can find me at strangefamiliars.com. That's the podcast, but all the contact information goes to me.
And Josh?
Same for the books Where the Footprints In Volumes 1 and 2. You can find more information about me, including all the interviews that your hearts desire, and also my other books, links to those at joshuacutchin.com, JOSHUACUTCHIN.com.
Are you sure it's not Cutchin?
What did I say?
No, I'm joking. Because I used to misspell it in the early days. I would add a letter, remember?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, no. As long as you don't say Cutchin, we're all good.
We got a Cutchins on an interview we did recently. I forget which one it was.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Then, yeah.
All right, so we'll do a Patreon segment with the two of you to finish up the rest of this book.
Absolutely.
Sounds good.
I want to take a moment to thank all of my patrons. Without you, this show would not be possible. And I want to give an extra special shout out to those of you pledging $10 or more. Super Inframan, Allison Cook, Eric Hervin, Tim, Joel Thomas Runyon, Empty K, Nagatha Christie, Dorcamus Prime, Patricia W., Barbara Fisher, Will Powell, Big Boy Limina, Craig Parmenter, Walker, Joanna Rojas, Maddie, David Moore, Vincent Treewell, Stone Wilderness, Luke Osborne, Becky Trainer, Rob Drummond, Alex Whitcomb, Edu Camahort, Tactical Therapist, Janet Bunderson, 36 Dingo, Taylor, Sam Sharon, Jennifer Campbell, American Rambler, Kevin, Chris Ernst, Christopher Vaughn, Frank Earl, John Rutledge Foster III, Andy McNamara, Sasha Jorg, Sedgder, Dominic O'Malley, Riker and Stark, J. Otto Bullitt, Jose A., Charles Davis, Roger Gonzalez, Craig Cisternos, Ray Benedetto, Linds Jackson K., Alfred Tuttle, Matthew Sproul, Kevin Schreck, Patricia Giaquinta, William Lovelace, Mark Brady, Carla Mahoney, and James Lattimore. Thank you all so very much. So the rest of this conversation with Tim, Joshua, and I will be on Patreon as I finish off my list of questions for them about their book. So this was the 8th anniversary show. Been doing this 8 years now. It feels like I've been doing it forever. I can't remember a time where this wasn't in my life, honestly. Where Did the Road Go has been one of the best things that ever happened to me. And I thank you all so much for listening, for supporting, for being Patreons, for sharing it, for commenting, contacting me. It's just been an amazing, amazing experience. And yes, I know I promised I was going to have a book out at some point. I'm actually working on 2 currently. One on some new ways of looking at the phenomena, some kind of thought experiments, theories, etc., and one on my personal experiences. I think that'll be the second one. I'm kind of taking my time on the personal experiences and including stuff that's not paranormal, kind of just life experiences as well. It'll be mostly focused on paranormal stuff, but I think some of that other stuff might be entertaining for people, at least conversationally, it seems to be. So that'll be coming. One of those will hopefully be done this year, probably the theory book. So if you want to contact me, there's a number of ways to do it. You can find me on Facebook. I'm the only Seriah Ascath. You can email me at contact@wheredidtheroadgo.com. If you have a story you want to share, either just personally or you want us to talk about it on the air or you want to come on and talk about it, that story is at wheredidtheroadgo.com. If you want to submit some of your own music for the outro of a episode, also contact@wheredidtheroadgo.com. We have merchandise. I rarely talk about this, but we have some really awesome merchandise, some by Tim Renner and some by Jeff Ritzman. You can find that at wheredidtheroadgo.com on the merchandise or shop link. I forget which it is. Also on there, you'll find links to our new Discord, Facebook page, Facebook group. I believe the Facebook group is on there. Should be on there. Twitter, and whatever else we have that I'm forgetting at the moment. So, but everything can be found at wheredidtheroadgo.com. That is the one-stop place for everything. Where Did the Road Go? Next week, as has become sort of a tradition here, we will have our UFO history show with Mike Cleland and Aaron Gullius, part 796. I don't know exactly what we're going to be talking about, if it's just going to be the stuff that's happened over the year or maybe we'll branch out a little because I don't really feel like a ton of UFO stuff has happened this year, but we'll see. But yeah, I'm hoping before then to also have put together a master edit of all the UFO history shows. It may only show up on YouTube. I'm not sure yet, but it's going to be long. I got to go through and edit everything together and hopefully get that up this week for everyone. That should be fun. And once again, I can't thank all of you enough for supporting this endeavor, and hopefully things get more and more interesting as we go along. I'll see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.